I mean, I was talking to one of my friends recently, a young person, relatively speaking, in relation to me, and always very strong, out of control behavior, body all over the place. Kind of, he sees food, he jumps into the food, whoever's food it is. Speech just garbage comes out of his mouth. And then all his life has been this way. And so he wonders why he has problems. And I said, well, you haven't even begun the junior school entry level Buddhist practice, which is control your speech. And he said, but it's all the mind. I said, of course it's all the mind. Of course it's coming from the mind. The speech is the servant of the mind, but we don't pay attention. And even though this is like the most basic teaching, it really, even for myself, I've been hearing this how many years, but it really takes time to hear this. If we can just control our behavior, then 99% of our problems wouldn't occur. Can you imagine if the whole world controlled their behavior? Can you imagine if you didn't say those words, or in particular, you didn't do those actions of killing and raping and lying and dropping bombs? I mean, imagine the world. Then we'd have the space and the miracle of space to work on the mind, which of course is the source. So it's such a very skillful way of putting it, first control the body and the speech and then control the mind. But of course, if you think about controlling the speech and the body, what does the controlling is the mind. So you're still working with your mind, but instead of thinking, I'm going to use my mind to control my mind, which is more subtle, you're thinking, I'm going to use my mind to control my speech and body. Because why? Because that's what interacts with others. That's what has the effect upon others. That's what does the harming. And of course, that's what does the helping. So it's simple. It sounds simple. I mean, if you go to your therapist, we don't talk about, often we do the opposite in the West. I find this very fascinating. In the West, we actually think it's good to talk. And we think it's our right to talk. And we call it sharing. I mean, it sounds so noble, doesn't it? I want to share my feelings. And what do you think your feelings are? They're all your own vomit pouring out, dumping your own projections onto the other person, thinking it's useful. And why we stress that in our culture, I think, is very interesting. Because we don't, with respect to us, we don't know how to notice what is going on in between our ears, as we would say in our culture. Because we're so addicted to the external world. Think about it. From the second we're born, from the second we wake up in the morning, what we mean by the world is what's out there, the objects of our five senses. We know that we are the observer of the world, but we don't pay attention to the observer. We don't have techniques for that. With psychotherapy, maybe we're doing a bit of it. And if you're religious, then, you're religious and you're praying to God, you're becoming more, you go into a retreat, you're a little Catholic nun in a silent retreat, you're looking into your mind for sure. You're doing that. But that's considered weird and kind of not natural. Normal world for us is even the way we define ourselves as a person. And I find this utterly fascinating. The way we define ourselves as a person in the modern world, I would suggest, is we define ourselves in terms of being socialized. That means you only become who you are in relation to others. Think about that. That's very fascinating. You only become you become the person you are in relation to being socialized, in relation to relationship with others. So then that's really, I mean, putting it from the negative point of view, that from the Buddhist point of view, that's called attachment to reputation. This kind of schizophrenic sense of not being anybody until you're approved of by somebody, not being who you really are until someone feeds back to you that what you just said was a good word, what you just did was a good action. It's almost like this attachment. This is the way the Buddhists putting it. This deep instinctive primordial yearning to be seen, hunger to be heard, hunger to be liked. Keep it simple. Forget about even saying be approved of. It's called the hunger to be liked. You've got to ask the question, why do we have a hunger, a neediness, an emotional hunger to be liked? It's obvious. If we have a hunger to be liked, the assumption is I'm not worthy until someone says, you're a nice person, Robina. That's how primordially deep it is. And that's how demented it is. But we consider that normal behavior. We consider it normal, I remember one time I went to visit some friends who had two little daughters. And this is normal behavior. This is normal. And I remember the little daughter acted a certain way. And then I could tell immediately she was waiting for feedback from me. And I didn't give her the feedback. So she became completely self-conscious and blushed and was completely caught up in herself, paralyzed, because you could tell instantly, this is how we all are, that she behaved a certain way. And because she's done that in the past, she's used to mummy and daddy laughing or praising her or clapping or sweetheart, that's wonderful. And I just out of naivety didn't respond. I was observing her, I think, I don't know. And I didn't respond in the way her attachment to reputation expected. So she became paralyzed. And you can see her little mind sort of freaking out because she didn't get the response that she was familiar with getting. And that's what attachment to reputation is. This is the one that drives all of us. I mean, I always quote this one. And it's an eye-opener to us because we consider this normal behavior. We consider, you consider it normal. The two little girls are playing, and then you're each playing with the other, and then a little fight comes, and then you freak out, and then you hug up, then you hug and you make up again, That's considered normal behavior. But like another child, I know there's another girl who's said to be the reincarnation of one previous Lama, which implies she has no ego, which implies she doesn't have attachment or anger. But what she looks like is very kind of self-contained. She looks like she doesn't need other little girls, which we call autistic, which we call not healthy. Because she doesn't have this hunger to be seen by others. She's quite contented who she is, So she would be considered abnormal because she's not hungry all the time for feedback. But that's how deeply this attachment is. And you think of the world like what we call success. Success is you being good at something, but you're not successful until somebody else approves of you and claps and tells you you are successful. In other words, if you're the best pianist on the planet, you'd be depressed if you never played a concert and no one clapped. Or even more directly, if you're an actor and you go out there and you act, but no one claps, you'd be devastated because we rely upon that feedback. So there's good side to that. That's called communication. That's called compassion and kindness and being useful to others. That's amazing. It's communication. Because in our culture, we can't distinguish between neurotic, I-based, fear-based, emotional, hungry craving to be approved of, and valid, reasonable, appropriate, other-based connection with others. We can't tell the difference, It's very fascinating. And this all the time comes down, seems to me, that points to this very specific approach in Buddhist psychology, which is not how we think in our culture, where the Buddha makes this utter distinction between neurotic, fear-based, I-based, desperate, delusional, disturbing, needy, unhappy states of mind, which we think are normal, so normal that you'd be weird if you didn't have them, and the positive, reasonable, other-based, dependent arising-based qualities. We can't tell the difference. That's the revelation for the Buddhist approach. And most Westerners don't know this. They don't study it. We just think being mindful as being a Buddhist, watching your breath as being a Buddhist. Well, as Lama Zopa says, thieves need mindfulness. Big deal. It's not even virtuous. It's what you do with what you're being mindful about is the point, So this is where we either have the loneliness, the people who are on their own, and this is not ever criticism. This is doing Buddha's analysis of our mind, of our behavior, So lonely people, a person who's lonely is usually the person, you don't have stories about people in relationships with 7 children who feel lonely. No, they're never the lonely ones we talk about. And they are probably more lonely. We always talk about the lonely ones of people on their own, because that's what's unnatural in our world. We should feel sorry for people like that, and we should. That's why all the old people rotting away as old vegetables, drugged out of their brains, all lonely in whole people's homes. They've got no body, no family, no friends, no nothing. But the lonely people are people, when we're lonely, it's the same disease as before. When we're lonely, it means our head is full of thoughts and ideas and yearnings and wishes. And we're having all these conversations in our head. And we always have conversations as if we're talking to other people. And if there's no one there, then the stark experience of being lonely, no one to talk to, no one to share my experiences with. So we should ask the question in that assumption. Why? We should ask the question, why do I need to share my experiences with somebody? So this is where we conflate appropriate sharing, which is loving and kind and generous and thinking of other people and inviting friends over for lunch and giving them gifts and offering them food and listening to their problems. That's good sharing. But the sharing we all experience that we're lacking when we call it loneliness is that there's no one to love me. I have no one to love me. I have no one to give to. I have no one to listen to me. I have no one to talk to. That's what we mean by loneliness. Well, what's that? That's thwarted attachment to being seen and heard. And that's our main disease, that's our main disease. And it's shocking to hear it like this, so blunt, Because this is where when you're in Buddhist and Western psychology, if you tell a person you're going off for even a weekend retreat, that's okay. We feel, well, that's good. You need a bit of space. We need a bit of space because we're working hard, helping people all day. We need a bit of space to take care of ourselves. But if you go off for a month, not to mention 3 months, not to mention 3 years, you know. Just now, I've just been come just last on my birthday, you know, on the 20th, Charmaine, who runs the center here, whose house I'm in now. Where's Charmaine? Is she here? Are you here, Charmaine? Show your face. Oh, she's not here. Is she here, Matt?
I'm here.
Where are you? There's Charmaine. She kindly offers me her house, very kind. This is her Buddha, her house. And she walks out the door and locks it and goes around the corner, and she lives with Matt. There's Matt on the top there. They live together. I'm just telling private secrets now. Anyway, Charmaine drove me up to Crestone, which is 3.5 hours north in Colorado. And we went to see, there's all these people there. There's all these Buddhists. I think 30, 40 years ago, somebody there bought all the land and then offered little packets of it, little blocks of land to these different people, as long as they use it for spiritual purposes. So there's all kinds of people. And the Karmapa was there many years ago. And apparently, so lots of people have got, and many of my friends. So we had a little party for my birthday, about 4 people, 3 nuns, 3 Buddhist nuns, all doing some kind of retreat. And then 1 monk. And then there's Mary and Harry, you know, Harry that fell over the mountain. Well, Harry's up there. We should have shown the picture. Never mind. I sent some photos on Facebook. Harry's now, I told you, he looks like Santa Claus, looks like Father Christmas, very fat, totally bald head and a big white beard, big flushing out here. So here's one who nearly fell off the mountain. So they're both moving into retreat, into 3-year retreat. Now that would be considered in your wonder, you know, what are you doing in retreat? We can't imagine it. We wouldn't know. 2 days break is fine. 2 days break from your crazy husband, that's intelligence. But 3 years, we can't work that out in modern psychology. And I'm quite literal. We don't know what they're doing. And that's the puzzle. That's the puzzle. What the hell are you doing in 3 years? Well, you know, that's the Buddhist view of being your own therapist, working on your mind. Okay, using all these approaches, these 3-year retreats coming from Vajrayana, where you take a particular deity, a particular quality that you want to cultivate, and you then do these practices related to that deity, and you're practicing 4-6 times a day. You're in silence. You organize. You decide in advance the parameters. You decide exactly who you're going to allow into your little kind of retreat space. Your doctor, maybe somebody else. That's it, and you stick to that for 3 years. You know, and you're silent. This is the point. So that's just 3 years. Some people do 12 years, 15 years, 25 years, all their life. You know. So you think, what on earth are they doing? And it really is true. It's an utter puzzle to us. It's a mystery to us. What would you be doing in those 3 years? Well, what this points to, I suppose, is the point. It points to the subtlety of our mind in the Buddha's view, the level of subtlety that we can and must, in the long term, access, you know, in order to do the unpacking and unraveling of the chaos in here, in order to rid the mind completely of all the delusions and then eventually perfect all the goodness. That's the job you're doing. And that doesn't necessarily is intensely personal job. If you're sitting there in single point of concentration, you do not need friends, I promise you. You don't have to wish to share. But of course, if you're in retreat, like I remember interviewing Venerable Rene, our wonderful Swiss people, many people know him. Venerable Rene is a Swiss monk, meditating for years. I interviewed him in 1995 about his single-pointed concentration retreat, one of his first ones. Well, no, maybe not his first, but one of his intense first main ones was 2.5 years. And he was attempting to get single-pointed concentration. And this is from the sutra practice, which, as we know, is described in 9 stages of cultivation. So this is on your own. But as he said in the interview, it's very moving to read it. He said, of course, he was up in our center in Spain, in the Sierra Nevada, and he was at Urseling, the place of clear light, blessed by His Holiness and named in 1982. And it's a gorgeous place. He said it reminded him of Tibet. So he was there in his own little tiny house, little stone house, you know, doing this all day, every day. And he said there are other people in retreat too. And occasionally you'd take a break and you'd have a chat with another friend, because you need that. We're human, you know. Many people don't. I mean, Geshe Lama Konchog, he was in 7, 8 years, 9, 10, at least 8 or 9 years in isolation, utter isolation, because he's that advanced. Is that advanced. And they're not just sitting there watching their navel, not just sitting there doing mindfulness, not just sitting there being self-centered, they're actually doing the job. And this is what's difficult for us using the Western views of the mind. It's hard to comprehend this until we study the Buddhist view of the mind. They're unpacking and unraveling the contents of the mind, which go to incredibly subtle degrees. The levels of subtlety that we do not posit anything like in neuroscience or psychology. That's why it's a puzzle to us. That's why we can't imagine what a person's doing, you know. And this is the job, and that, like we talked last time, this is a job properly done is done on your own. By definition, it's done on your own. So that's why most of us won't give up sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Most of us won't give up all the normal things of the world and go to the mountains and do this. Most of us won't. That's okay. But we can still need our wisdom wing mode. We still need our retreat mode. And that's the 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 2 hours, 1 hour you take in the morning on your own. And the half an hour, the hour you take on the evening on your own. That's the wisdom wing work. That's the retreat mode. That's where you do the work. That's where you do the looking at your own mind. You do your purification practices. You make your own decisions. You're being your own friend. You're being literally your own therapist. If you don't do that work, it is impossible to do the compassion wing work. That is to say, having other people in your face all day. How in the name of heaven can you imagine you can keep your wits about you and keep control of your body and speech and your mind if you've never practiced it in your morning and evening sessions? It's not possible. That's why we all go berserk. That's why we get completely confused, because the point is using the Buddhist view of the mind. When we're with others, because our attachment's running over time, wants to be loved, we want to be approved of, we want to be heard. Then our anger when it doesn't get approved of, then the resentment and the jealousy and all the dramas and the annoyance with the kids. We're sort of, what our trouble is when we haven't done the work on our own minds, haven't done the retreat mode morning and night, then we kind of, when we're around other people and other things, our mind kind of merges with them and we cannot distinguish between our stuff and their stuff. That's the nightmare of relationships. That's where you go to your therapist and you try to have, mediation. You can't even begin to know what's going on until you start to own your part of it and let that other person own their part, because we conflate them, because we have no sense that what I'm seeing when I see that person and hear that person, I have no sense of what's my role in that and what's their role. Because also, and this is where the analysis, the Buddhist analysis, because when the attachment's in my mind working overtime, frantic to be heard, frantic to be seen, frantic to be approved of, frantic to get happiness, frantic and believing that the husband, the children, the weather, the food should do it, then my mind is kind of completely seeping into the objects. And we can't distinguish the difference between my mind and the object of my mind. This is the fundamental job to do when you're a Buddhist. And this is, we talk about this in the West, we understand it in psychology, but this is the Buddha's expertise. That's why you've got to have the retreat mode first. You've got to have your silent time first in the morning. You've got to have it, even 5 minutes. And then through the day, if you can, take it. Go to the toilet, close the door, take some space. You need it. And not just to sort of recuperate from the exhaustion, which is how we think of taking space in the West. Do that to control yourself, but also to be conscious of what's going on in your own mind, to own your part of it. It's a really hard job, because the nature of delusions is they absorb into the object. So if you've got, you've got ear consciousness, right? You've got ear consciousness. It's not something we talked about. I do this blog every week on the website, and the one we just did recently, I think, was how we make the body the boss, as Lama Yeshe says, So we've got the senses. This is very precise. It's very unique to Buddha's view. It's really an eye-opener. First of all, we can hardly tell the difference between our sensory consciousness and our mental consciousness, isn't it? This is how we are, Mental consciousness is all your thoughts and feelings and emotions and interpretations and viewpoints and opinions, millions of them all raging on inside here. But then the senses are just they've got a very bare bones function. But as Lama Yeshe says, we make the body the boss. So eye consciousness will see shape and color. That's it. I will see, my eye goes here and sees black, doesn't even know it's black, but it cognizes black, cognizes this shape. That's all it does. But within a millisecond, quicker than Google, what happens is my mental consciousness is accessed. And that's where the workshop is, as Lama Zopa says. That's where the thoughts and feelings and emotions and good and bad, the label black, the label round, the label nice, the label my thermos, the label thermos, all the opinions, all the things. The mind is full of, and this is where the workshop is. This is what we have to learn to become familiar with. That's why we've got to have the space to see it, to unpack it, unravel it. It's a highly sophisticated job. And you cannot do it when you're in the middle of your husband making you crazy. It's not possible unless you're a highly advanced practitioner, and most of us aren't. No wonder we go crazy. And no wonder I always talk that thing, the UN or some organization quotes that 40% of all women on the planet who get murdered, you know who murders them? The bloke in the same bed. It's not about men and women. This is about attachment and anger and not knowing our minds, being absorbed in all the rubbish and going crazy. You know, we can't tell the difference between my mind and the person. That's the liberation. That's the miracle of the wisdom wing work. And that's the retreat mode. And you can't do that in the midst of it. It's like suddenly you got to go play tennis with Federer and you can hardly hit a backhand. How the hell can you play tennis with Federer when the stuff is bombarding you? He's hitting with all these balls. You just have to sink and collapse and go mad because you've done no retreat mode. You've done no practice. You've got to learn to do backhands 1,000 times on those back courts before you get anywhere near Federer. How can you keep your wits about you when you haven't even know how to play tennis? Even when you can play tennis, you just end up like that ridiculous Australian Greek boy. He's a genius. What's his name, that tennis player? He's disappeared a bit now. He's so berserk. He's a genius tennis player. What's his name?
Nick Kyrgios.
So that's the one. He's not around much anymore because he's clear. He's like a genius tennis player. But natural, but he's a maniac mentally. He has complete mental breakdowns. He collapses. He cries. He has tantrums because he hasn't done the wisdom wing work. He hasn't worked on his own mind. And as soon as Federer starts beating him, he has a tantrum because he hasn't done the other work, the inner work. You know, it's unbelievably important. The mind is too subtle and too difficult, and we're too absorbed in these delusions to see them unless we have some space. And then when you've done all your years and years of playing on the back court and years, then you can play Federer and not lose the plot. And then you know when your husband says something, you're seeing what's happening, you're seeing your own mind, and you're skillful enough to say the right words or to say nothing. That really takes incredible practice. It's unbelievable practice. It's so sophisticated. You cannot do it until you do the inner work first, your retreat mode.
Yes.
Anybody got any questions for me? Anybody got any questions? Mary, Mark.
I have a question.
Come on then. Good, Yuval, go for it.
But I don't know if it's related, but it's like in the Netherlands right now, the government kind of like asks us to make a choice if we want to donate organs after our passing or not. And I am kind of struggling a little bit because on one hand, I'm like, wow, that's what I'm kind of like contemplating every morning, like, okay, to give everything away, to be generous.
That's right. Exactly.
This would be a huge generosity.
Amazing.
But on the other hand, I have no control whatsoever on the topic we're discussing or you're mentioning now. Like I lose it like that.
That's right. Exactly, Yuval.
And if I'm not certain that I'm not in a stage of not even being really dead, but just kind of passing.
That's right.
Maybe the awareness is there. And I find it very difficult. And I wanted to ask, but yeah, I also wanted to find the answer myself.
It's a really good point, Yuval. Of course, it's perfect. It's perfect. So the thing is, it's interesting, in Lama Zopa book that's come out as a paperback now called How to Face Death Without Fear, which I happen to edit, so I'm familiar with it. This is one of the major points, you know. There are different scenarios, the advice from Rinpoche, the different scenarios in which you would die. What to do if your loved one dies at home, what to do if your loved one dies in hospital, what to do if your loved one dies suddenly, and what to do if your loved one wants to give their organs. So of course, on the one side, as Rinpoche says, in any Tibetan Lama you ask, they will praise anybody who wants to give their organs, the most amazing gift. And they all say to die with that level of compassion on your mind is perfect for the person, because you need to die peacefully and virtuously so that you can get another decent human rebirth, right? So they all praise it. So in this book, I mean, I didn't think about all this until I had to edit the teachings, and then I started doing research. And then I realized that, you know, what happens is the moment you stop breathing, which is, of course, for the modern world, that's called death, but that's not dead yet. In the Buddhist view, your mind, the grosser level of your consciousness has now ceased. Your brain activity has ceased. Your heart has stopped breathing. The heart, you know, so you look like you're dead, but your subtle mind is there. And that level of your consciousness doesn't need a brain. So there's no physical evidence of it. And that's where the big conflict for Buddhists comes in. And it's discussed in the book. It's a really interesting point. So the point is, when the person stops breathing, from the Buddhist point of view, or particularly the Vajrayana Buddhist point of view, it's best to leave the body for at least 3 days, because the evidence has been found from this perspective that it takes at least 3 days for the mind to leave the body. And because even though the gross level has ceased, but the subtle mind is still there, and the subtle mind, which is more like your dream mind, the person can be still conscious, but you can't see it. So there's all this evidence we know from ordinary people of being in a dream, but also you know what's going on around you. Or people who have had their operation, for example, and they're completely unconscious, but they have this vivid experience of observing what's going on in the operation. There's so many reports about this. I remember this book I read while I was doing this book, and it's a book by an American medical journalist called The Undead. It was all the difficulties and the conflicts and the problems now in the American medical system. That's what he knows. The difficulties of when they're not sure now when death is. All these reports, for example, of people coming back to life. It doesn't fit with the materialist view, but it fits with the Buddhist view that even though you've stopped breathing, your subtle mind is still there. And until you know that the subtle mind has left, you cannot say the person is dead. So that's what they're even finding now. So all these people coming back to life, and it's really confusing. But another whole thing, he had a whole chapter in this book of people who reported what they call out-of-body experiences while they're having their operation. They're in complete anesthetic, they're totally unconscious, but the Buddhist perspective is that's their subtle mind having an experience of being conscious of exactly what's going on, and all these different people reporting what the doctor said, what the instruments they used, the jokes they cracked, the music they played, because their subtle mind is conscious. So that doesn't need a brain, and you don't feel anything because you're under anesthetic, but you can see what's going on. So this can also be for a person who's technically dead from the materialist point of view, but their subtle mind is still there. So he reported in this book, this one woman who was going to give her organs. So when she stopped breathing, they keep her breathing, they keep her heart beating. So she looks warm and like she looks like a living person still. She's on the operating table, and the nurse who was monitoring the heartbeat, she said the moment they got the big saw, the circular saw to cut the person in half, to cut out her organs, the heart was observed on the computer to go from 100 to 200 beats a minute. And the author cracked a joke and said, I wonder what a dead person has to be anxious about. But that fits perfectly, Yuval, with the Buddhist explanation that her subtle mind being still there, she was conscious of what was going on at a subtle level. She wouldn't have felt anything. Her senses had ceased, but she would have observed this and freaked out, thinking, what are they doing? Cutting my body. Don't they realize I'm not dead yet? And then the point about that in the Buddhist view, which is why Lama Zopa in this chapter, he said they need to be very careful. He didn't say much more, because the point is the mind is still there. And if you disturb the person's mind, that can change the karma from the virtuous karma, which will give them a good rebirth, to negative karma, which will give them a suffering rebirth. Because when the mind freaks out, that's ego, and that can be very disturbing. That's the key reason it's not so good. So on the one hand, Rinpoche praises it hugely as an amazing way to die. But on the other hand, there can be these problems where the person can be still conscious at a subtle level and can know what's going on, and that can freak them out and change their karma and give them a suffering rebirth. It doesn't follow that everybody would feel that, but this is a really good example. So it's a very fraught topic. It's a marvelous thing, but if you can die peacefully and not be disturbed and not be aware of what's going on, then it'll be great for you. So it's just, and I mean, it was interesting, this medical journalist, he was quite controversial because he was very critical of the industry, saying how very arrogant they were, very elitist. They were demanding that people give their organs. I've heard even in Europe now, the default law is that you will give your organs unless you say otherwise. And that's just this industry being very manipulative and making it like the most precious gift in the whole world. It is a precious thing to do. But I think that because reincarnation, Buddhism wouldn't make a big fuss about it. It's marvelous, but it's treated as something kind of totally unique and totally special. And he was quite critical of the industry, how arrogant they are, and I'm not trying to put everybody down. Don't misunderstand me. I'm just quoting this man, this medical journalist who's an atheist. So it's a fraught topic. So my own personal view is that there are many ways you can use your body to help people after you've died. Give it to the doctors, the young doctors, and let them learn about anatomy. That's just as good a gift. Of course, it's marvelous to get a new heart, a new liver, a new face. This is very special, but it's not the only way you can help. Do you understand, Yuval? Food for thought. Yeah, good. What else, people? Very interesting. Any other points?
I have a question.
Yes, Martha, talk to me.
How are you?
Good, darling.
My mother passed away on October the 25th of COVID. She was Catholic, but in her heart, she was a Buddhist.
Yes.
She loved mantras and all that. So I treated her death according to the teachings, but I had like a conflict after because I was we Latin tend to be very touchy, and I left her die without touching her too much. So I disturb her body.
Good, okay.
But I sometimes I feel like I should have
Touched
excuse me, like
should have
yeah,
her.
like a hug or touch
Okay,
her more.
but was she conscious before she died? Was she conscious?
No. The last 2 days, no.
Okay, then don't worry. She wouldn't, I mean, that's okay. Your presence was enough, Marta. Don't you worry, darling. And if you were saying prayers, then that's the most powerful, because her subtle mind would have been aware of that presence. The touching, don't worry, because she wasn't conscious. It's all right, darling. It's good. You did the right thing.
Thank you.
Good.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Anybody else? Anybody about silent mind, holy mind, or berserk mind, crazy mind? I don't know.
I have a question.
Yes, Mika.
Okay. In the beginning, you were talking about calming your mind, and that we are attached to a lot of things. And what's happening with me, especially when my mind goes, my mind goes. I only have the word berserk. Like
Berserk is a good word, Mika, and we all understand. And we all have a berserk mind. It is normal. Go on.
Yes. And what then happens? It feels like it's like a cooking pan. The pressure in a cooking pan.
Yes.
And then what's happening? My body starts shaking.
Yes.
Also, what's happening if I don't talk? If I don't talk, then I start crying, but also throwing things. It doesn't stop. And
I understand.
I'm looking for a solution. I don't want to do it. Afterwards, I think, oh, and there goes all my vows and everything.
Yeah, I can understand, Mika. So, darling, are we talking about a scenario in which you are arguing with somebody else, or are we talking about you on your own? It's a big difference.
Okay, that's
this is a big point.
Yeah, no, it's sometimes it happens with my only with myself, but most of the time something already started happened
with another person.
With another person.
Okay.
And then it goes inside, and then I go sometimes home.
Well, I mean, if you've got any understanding of the Buddhist view, and I think you have, what's happening is all these, even if we're sitting on our own quietly, Mika, we can see that our mind is berserk. I mean, this is what we consider normal in our culture, and it is normal. But for the Buddha, in relation to Buddha's amazing view of how marvelous our mind can be, we are all mentally ill, honey. So just get used to the idea. We don't like that concept, but it's really true. That's normal behavior. And in our culture, we don't have techniques to stop it. We only have pills, and we do have good therapy, but we sort of leave it until it's a bit late. In other words, Mika, you're only talking now. I use that analogy about when you're driving on the freeway and you've never thought of car mechanics and you've never looked at your wheels, and suddenly your wheels are about to fall off at 100 kilometers an hour. So that's what you're describing, is that scenario. And what you're hoping is, have I got a technique to help deal with my wheels falling off? Well, it's a bit late then. So the Buddhist approach, the biggest learning for us, Mika, is not to know it's this damage control is about the best we can do when we get to that point. So don't just try to suppress your speech. If you want to shout and yell, it's not good for the other person. If you can control and not harm, there's two things. One, you're harming yourself. But two, you're harming someone else. So if you can not harm the other person, that's at least good. So, but meanwhile, the real point is this: the learning from this, Mika, is to know that there are techniques, there are tools to use in the wisdom mode on your own seat before you get anywhere near anybody else, honey. That's like you're in the middle, you're describing, you're playing tennis with Federer and you can hardly hit a ball. So you're describing that, and that's reasonable. So you've got to do your practice, baby. And you've got to know that eventually the skill we have to learn is to catch what is going on in our mind before it becomes intense. But our problem in our culture, we don't look at our mind. That's when the wheels are beginning to wobble slightly, but we don't pay attention to that. We think it doesn't matter. And then we wonder why the wheels fall off. So the learning from that The learning from, do your best not to kill somebody when you're like that, okay? Don't be moralistic. Do your best to control yourself. And then the real work is to go back to basics and develop a practice and slowly do some purification, do some practice morning, practice night, train your mind and become ever more familiar day after day with all the thoughts before they become strong, precious girl. That's the big picture, long-term practice. Are you hearing the point?
Yes, I'm hearing the point. Thank
Just
you.
do your best not to kill somebody when you're like that, okay? But the job is to learn to see it before it gets too strong. That's the skill we have to learn, honey. But our trouble is we don't notice. When we're feeling fairly reasonable, we think, oh, I haven't got any problems, but we have got problems, but at a much subtler level. And that's Buddha's expertise, that ways to see the mind when it seems ordinary, but even at that level, it's still berserk. Just to grab it before it gets too strong. That's the key to success. That's the key to success. That's the one, honey, I tell you. Are you hearing me?
Yes, I'm hearing you.
Be very
Yes.
patient with yourself and very humble and very brave and learn about your mind. And that's the big learning from that kind of, the screaming one. You learn, I've got to go back to basics. And because the thing is, like another person, a friend, somebody here, talking about how he's very controlled and doesn't say anything. And then his partner keeps talking and talking and talking. And then suddenly he explodes. There's no buildup, there's just explosion. That's very typical as well. So that person has got good control over his speech, but he's not controlling his mind yet. So it builds up until you burst. That's no good either. But we can't be too perfectionist. We've got to learn from this. So the first one is at least don't say the words. At least don't punch the person. At least don't kill the person. Do you understand? You control the body and speech. And that's stupendous practice. But then the real practice after that is to be able to learn to look at the mind itself. And then we can learn to even change the mind. So this is the one that's actually quite advanced. So like if you come in for Christmas and you've got 47 family members and you can't stand that lot and you can't stand your grandma, you do your best to, to control yourself. But mostly it's like passive aggression. You're kind of controlling before you kill yourself, But even more than that, when you're with people, I think of the Christmas example, you're going to go to this house, who's going to be there, that the crazy people are going to be talking too loud, the old white supremacist uncle will be there, that all the crazy cousins will be there. You don't go with resistance. You decide, okay, I'm going to be there for 3 hours. I'm going to hand myself over to these people and I'm going to be happy. I'm going to wash the dishes. I'm going to be kind to everybody and I'll shut my mouth and stop arguing. You've got to make that decision first. You make that decision and then when you do your practice in the morning, you're going to be meeting your partner throughout the day, he's going to be shouting and yelling at you and you prepare yourself and you make a decision. I'm going to allow that person to say what they like and not have an opinion about it. There's so many approaches, so many techniques, but it's not that easy. It's really difficult. Don't think it's not. But this is what being a Buddhist means. This is what it means, it's a full-on job. And that's what also, Mika, we've got to realize if some people, we're around some people, they're too dangerous for us. It's like if you're an alcoholic, nobody will expect you to give up attachment to alcohol while you're still drinking alcohol. That's insane. So nobody would expect you shouldn't expect yourself to not go berserk in front of some people who make you berserk. So you keep distance from them. You've got to be intelligent. But we're so foolish, we run into trouble, and then we wonder why we all go crazy. We've got to protect ourselves. So if you can't handle that person at Christmas lunch, then you risk your reputation and you say, no, I can't come, and let them all hate you. You've got to protect yourself from going crazy. This is so intelligent, Are we communicating, people?
Yes.
Now, of course, some people don't talk. And maybe they're okay, but maybe they've got to learn to talk sometimes. Maybe some people walk around looking like passive aggression, don't say a word. Maybe you've got to be kind and talk and open your mouth and say nice words. At least say nice words. Don't say the rubbish words, Anyway, you people, what do you think? Say some more. Ask me some questions. Mary Lutz, what are you going to say? She's busy. Look, are there any questions written down, Mary?
No questions, Venerable Robina.
All right. Anybody else got something to say?
Hi, Robina.
Who's this? Hello, Tony.
This is Tony.
Happy to see you, honey.
It's wonderful to see you. It always is great
Good.
being with the Sangha. I just
Good.
wish we could be closer.
No, we will be one day, Tony. Don't we worry.
I know we will. I know
We
we
will.
will.
Go on.
So I have a question for you. One of my favorite sutras, if not my very favorite,
Yeah.
is the Ubatamsaka Sutra.
Tell us about it.
the Flower Garland Sutra.
Okay. Wonderful.
And I was wondering, well, let me back up a little bit.
Yeah.
A short time ago, I dialed into Robert Thurman
Yes.
at the Tibet House, and he pulled out the Ubatamsaka Sutra and started reading from it.
Wow.
And what he mentioned was that that was the only thing that Lama Tsongkhapa took with him on his 3-year retreat.
Okay.
And I was wondering what your thoughts are about the Ubatamsaka Sutra. And I really haven't heard anything about it in our school in McGill.
No, I have absolutely no idea. I don't even know what it, so what does it teach? What does it say? What's the essence of it? Do you know, Tony? If you like it a lot, you must know.
I think the best way that I could say it,
Yeah.
essence is the essence of totality, where just about where the most extraordinary, the most altruistic and complete aspects, both from insight and theory of our practice, is demonstrated in about 1,800 pages of text, absolutely marvelous pages. The final chapter, about 400 pages, is absolutely exquisite.
Okay, good, wonderful.
So I was just wondering.
I know nothing about it. I'm so sorry. I can't help, Tony. I'm sorry. I'm disappointing to you. I know nothing. I haven't studied the sutras. The
Yeah,
only
like
sutra I know is the Heart Sutra, and I read a couple of others occasionally. I don't know much.
beautiful, fabulous.
So maybe the thing is about if you're going to read the commentaries. I mean, the Tsongkhapa must have written commentaries on it. I don't know, darling.
I have no idea.
Yeah.
I have.
What's it called?
Stories,
What's the name of the sutra?
it is the Ubatamsaka.
Ubatamsaka
Yeah.
Sutra. Okay, let's say
S-A-K-E, S-A-K-A, and
okay, it's one of the most influential Mahayana sutras of East Asian Buddhism. The title is rendered in English. Flower ornament. It just says, yeah. What is it called? The Flower Garland Sutra. Okay. So there you go. I mean, yes, how wonderful. I mean, I'm so happy, but I can tell you nothing about it. I'm so sorry, Tony.
All right, thank you.
Okay, sorry.
You clarified it. Thank
Thank
you.
you, Thank you,
Bye,
Tony.
everybody.
Thank you, sweetheart. Who else?
Thank you.
Ask me a
Ciao.
question I can answer. Ask me a simple question, you folks. Or say something.
Robina,
What is
I
that?
have a question.
Hello, Aileen. Who are you? Sweetly, talk to me. Where are you? Where are you, honey?
I'm in Copenhagen.
Good. Okay, talk to me.
Okay, so back what you were saying, when you decide to go, for example, to a dinner, like people you don't get along very well.
Yeah.
You're trying to control your body and speech.
Yeah.
But what happens when you hear people, like, for example, I identify myself a lot with you because I also have lots of roots in politics, and
Yes.
I tend to be the person correcting.
Yes. Yes.
And I'm trying less and less to do that because I find myself being self-righteous or arrogant.
That's right.
But how do I do that when people are just saying utterly crazy?
I know, darling. So listen, Aileen, this is the skill we have to learn. There's two wings of the bird, right? Compassion. Now, compassion wing is the point. Compassion is that whatever you say will be a benefit to that person. But what gives you the ability to know what will be of benefit is not compassion. That's wisdom. And wisdom is simply your common sense. And if you know who these two people are, there's a couple of, say, white supremacists or whatever you like, and there they are having a chat, and you know in your mind that their minds are completely closed. So if you started giving them a lecture, then it's going to be just like talking to the wall. You shut your mouth, baby, and it's good practice for you. Let them have their conversation, listen to them carefully, don't resist it, and just think about, that's fascinating, what interesting ideas. And you learn about the human mind. But we have to jump in and be all moralistic and give lectures. That's our own ego, baby. Now, on the other hand, if you're having a conversation with somebody and you can feel and hear that they're open-minded, then you might say something that would give them some food for thought. So compassion is the wish to benefit, but wisdom is the ability to know how. And that's the big skill we need to learn. And often silence is the only one. And then love them for who they are. Don't paint them as monsters. Just think that's human beings with their deluded minds, and you learn about those delusions. It's like you're doing a little analysis of a crazy mind, and you learn about it, and you go to yourself and you say to yourself, thank you for showing me crazy mind. Thank you for showing me delusions. Thank you for showing me anger. And you learn about it. Otherwise, you just you're walking around like a fundamentalist saint. And that's a disaster. This is control the speech, but that demands some wisdom in the mind, baby. You get my point? Good. It's not easy. What else? I mean, I remember having a conversation with a white supremacist. And I mean, I was completely fascinated. I wanted to get into his brain. I asked him so many questions. I was completely fascinated by how he thought. He just thought I was listening to him and probably thought I was agreeing with him. No, I was just listening and asking him questions. It totally fascinated me to learn about it instead of having a panic attack, you know. Or even to be more brutal now, more gross. I remember on a plane to Thailand, this old wrinkled old guy, nothing wrong with wrinkles, but he was really, and he started blurring about his experience. He was going off to Thailand for the girls. So I was fascinated by this, what he thought, how he thought, what he did with these girls. I mean, it was just, he just vomited out all his experiences. It was revolting, but I was fascinated by this bloke's mind, you know. I learned a lot about these sex maniacs who go to Thailand for pretty girls. And I won't go further details. It was very fascinating. Do you understand? I love talking to him. He probably thought, and he kept saying how, oh, they think I'm so gorgeous. He was the most ugly, pathetic, sad bloke, you know. Of course, they didn't think he was gorgeous, because he thought they did, because they were these clever girls praising him. It doesn't take much to praise a bloke, just say he's nice, you know. Excuse me, being rude to blokes. Anyway, get my point, Aileen. So you've got to be wanting to know about the human mind, and don't be policemen. It's not easy, but it's you learn a lot, I tell you. It's fascinating. What else, people? Nothing else, you people? Come on. 8 more minutes. Nobody.
Okay, no.
Okay, go on, Lorna. Go, honey.
Well, I'm just appreciating your words because I have a very difficult relationship with my older sister.
Well done, girl. There's a good one, Lorna. Bring it on.
Yeah, it's hard, and she's always been very bossy and sarcastic, and I mean, she vomits stuff out and it's just unbelievable. And I've been dealing with this all my life.
Yes.
And she treats a couple of her children like that as well. And
yes.
So I always find it really hard to be around that.
Yes.
So what I found I started doing in the last year or so is when I'm talking with her on the phone, she lives in Alberta, I live in British Columbia. When she starts rattling off, I would hang up on her.
Okay. But you would say politely first, oh, got to go, babe, or you just hang up?
I would just hang up.
Oh, okay, fair enough.
And she would never, ever ask me why I did that.
Oh,
And so then I was feeling really bad because now I'm hanging up on her and I'm angry and all this other kind of stuff. So I finally thought, my God, I have to deal with this. And so talking with her is very difficult. So I decided I would put it in an email. And I spent a lot of time on the email, making sure I was coming from a place of love and compassion and telling her that I loved her and everything, and that I wanted a better relationship with her. And I also wanted to see her treat her children better. So in the end, it turns out she's really angry with me now. And she just decided, well, if you don't like the way I talk to you, then I won't talk to you anymore.
So do you understand that where the mistake was? Do you understand your mistake or not?
No, I guess not. But she is treating her children better.
Good,
So
she
I
might have
thought,
so she perhaps you did hear it. So you perhaps were useful. So there's two things in that. So there's two things in that, Lorna. This is again the similar point of Aileen. You're seeing this behavior, and it's not unlikely that what you're seeing is also actually what's happening. But the other component is your response to it, Lorna, and that's the wisdom wing. So this is the point. The real practice for you is to learn to, she triggers your attachment, she triggers your anger, she triggers your annoyance. So they're the things for you to look at. You know that, but this is the real hard, and that's where it's almost impossible when you haven't done the work first. So then the other one is knowing how to help her. So, she, of course, you pointed out her mistakes, but that we all know is very painful to hear. So you might be right about her mistakes. Now, if you say she is treating her kids better, maybe she heard you, maybe she didn't, but maybe you've cut her off even more. So this is where you've got to distinguish between what you're seeing, what of her stuff and your own stuff. And that's what I was saying before. This is a minefield. Do you understand, Lorna? So if you can learn about, forget about learning about your sister. If you can learn about your delusions, your attachment to getting what you want, your aversion when she says what your attachment doesn't want, because that's very simply the analysis for all of us. You might be right about her qualities. You get my point here? You might be right, but the real learning for you, the groundwork for you is to see your mind, your attachment, your anger, your annoyance, your upset. And of course, again, now the point is from the Buddhist perspective, you're born together. You got born in the same womb. You've known each other since the beginning. So you've got some very strong karmic history. So your job is to clean that up. So from your point of view, privately, Lorna, this is not for her to know. Your really powerful practice is the wisdom wing is for you to know your mind, your attachment, your anger, your hurt, and know it's past karma. And then, but second, when you're brave enough, you're able to paint a new picture of your sister. She also has got good qualities. So your job is to not just see her bad qualities, but you need to put on your compassion glasses when you've done your inner work, and then you start to see her good qualities. And before you know it, you'll be painting a new picture of her, because you now are only seeing her negative qualities. You've got to start seeing her positive ones. And then when you can feed that back to her, the whole dynamic changes. This is really intense stuff. You get my point, Lorna?
Yeah, it's hard. It's
Of course it is,
definitely hard. There's no doubt about that. She does treat her children better. She did hear me.
We're talking about your mind
A
now.
little
I don't
bit,
want to know
yeah.
about it. I want to talk about your mind if you want. But
Yeah.
hear my point. Let her be, Lorna. Let her be who she is. Your job is the wisdom wing is to you know your mind and know exactly what it is. What glasses are you having on that sees your sister? That's your work. And then paint a new picture of your sister. That's your work. Helping her with her problems comes second. Do you get my point?
Yes.
Good,
Yeah.
darling. Well done. Good example.
Hard.
It's
It's
exactly.
hard.
Everybody's got a variation of this story, I promise. Good, Lorna. Thank you for that. That's very helpful. We have 3 minutes to go, you people. It's gone like a dream, another hour. We could pack a lot in an hour, can't we? All right, Neil and Janice, hello, darlings. Happy to see your faces. Happy to see everybody. Doris, Steve. Okay, you people, that's it. We're done.